Hello, everyone. Hiya. Hello. I am Tom. I'm a volunteer at Zero. Today we're joined by James Sutton, who is a Guildfordian, who works for a campaign group called 0 Hour. Before we get started, fire exits over there. The toilets are also behind you. There are no planned tests of the fire alarm, but if there were to be an alarm, we'd all go meet up outside the church. Today we're going to be getting presented by James, and hopefully we'll get a video that we'll start with, and then he's just going to show you the bill. I think it's a really interesting kind of way to look at things. I'm involved in things like the Library of Things, another practical projects, and I think it's something we're missing out on, is actually getting more like systemic change. So I think it's really interesting. We're joined by some potential parliamentary candidates as well. We're also not joined by some, so keep that in mind. But I think that's everything. So I'll pass over to James.
Cool. If I get that at the start, I haven't even said anything. I'm here to talk to you about a law or a proposed law. Now, a lot of people, whether you're sort of in the pub or down in your workplace, you start talking to them about this kind of thing, they kind of go, "Oh goodness me, don't start talking about laws, James." But this is one of the most exciting, dynamic things that I've ever been involved in. I'm incredibly lucky to have volunteered and now work for 0 Hour. So essentially, I'm going to try and give you a whistle-stop tour through what this bill means, and also, and this is the critical thing for me, is what sort of role that you could take yourselves within this campaign, because we're all about building a movement. I know that word gets thrown around a lot these days, but we are genuinely building a movement. I'm going to tell you more about that in a second. But to begin with, I should start with the title of my presentation. So you may think, goodness me.
Sorry, I wanted to ask you, what is 0 Hour a charity? And
so technically we're not. We're a non-profit, but because we're a campaigning group, actually gives us more flexibility not to be bound by the Charity Commission's guidelines. So we're actually just we're effectively a company, but we have non-profit charitable objectives in our articles of association.
Okay, is it a new movement, not a branch or something?
It's a totally new and single organisation. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So, so the title of the presentation. This is about the Climate and Nature Bill. This is this new law that hopefully will become the Climate and Nature Act. And really today is all about how you can help Guildford become healthier and more resilient. And who wouldn't want that? But I'm going to start today with just showing you a short film, and I'll explain why I'm showing you this in a second. But this is our latest campaign film that we launched on birthday a few weeks ago.
Hi, excuse me. What's the hold up? A little bit of a rush.
Toads, my treasure.
I'm sorry, what?
It won't be long. Gorgeous little smashers.
Can you tell them I've got a meeting?
Just be a quick shake, my duck.
Shall I give them a lift?
Just nature, isn't it? Powerful yet gentle.
Precious nature. Its toes going with it. I mean, actually done. The plants make oxygen for trees to breathe. It keeps us alive. Okay, probably a bit, but fine.
And they suck out the carbon dioxide.
Dioxide, more
Lovely.
Food, soil to grow food.
and water to drink.
Or to get a skinning dip, it feels lovely on the old.
Yeah, okay. All right. Apart from the oxygen, the food and the water.
The sun powers food. Literally makes things grow.
Bees.
Very important.
First thing,
They do a lovely bit of pollinating.
It keeps us healthy.
it makes us less stressed. All right, fine. But apart from sucking out the carbon, supplying us with oxygen, giving us soil to grow food, water to drink, solar energy to power things, bees that pollinate everything, generally keeping us healthy healthy and whatever you say about being less stressed. What has nature ever done for us?
Bless us with coriander.
Why, no, so coriander can just go and absolutely.
So that's called Toad Watch. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, that is actually a frog at the end, but there's reasons why we use that. But effectively, the reason I've just shown you that is being a very entertaining film and a homage to Monty Python, for those of you who spotted that. It's to really try and land a message that actually, although I'd like to think that here at Zero Carbon Guildford, most of you are obviously very enamoured with climate and nature action. The point is, not everybody is, and often that's because of how it's communicated. And certainly when you start trying to think about the benefits as to why these things are important, it's incredibly useful to us to think in that way and to think, well, how can we make sure that we also get other people on board with these messages and get them behind the climate and nature deal as well? So maybe have that in your heads today, because by the end of the session, I'm going to be encouraging you all to take an action with me. So what is the climate and nature bill in essence? So it's a proposed law, that's what a bill is. There's various different types of bills, but ours is called a private members bill. So this is something that is proposed by politicians. We find a sponsor, they will table it in the House of Commons, and it will effectively work through parliamentary processes. And I will tell you more about that in due course. But essentially, I want to tell you what the key things are about the bill itself, and then I'll talk to you more about the detailed content. So I suppose one of the things that people always say is, well, why is this a really good thing for us to do right now? And the first thing I'll always say is actually, well, it's because it joins up climate and nature action together. So many things at the moment, and this is probably typified by the fact that you have two different COPs, one for climate, one for biodiversity. That's on the global scale. Actually, it's the same here in the UK. So many things now are tackled sort of in silos, and actually, when you think about it, you can't solve one crisis without solving the other. So ours is a joined-up approach to solving the climate and nature crises together. That also means we need a much better unified government approach, and that obviously is going to be, it's going to be a really interesting way as to how we take that forward. It's science-led, and without sounding like a shampoo ad, this is what scientists are telling us to do. There's no spin, there's no ideology in this. This is fundamentally scientists who we've written the bill with. We wrote them with a group of lawyers and a group of scientists who are saying essentially, if you want a livable future, this is what you must do. So this is really about making sure that we're not just simply going for ambition, it's what we actually just simply need to do. It's also cross-party. So really, it sounds strange because obviously we deal with a lot of political lobbying, political advocacy, but we are not ourselves political in the big pig. We don't mind which government of the day is in power, but as long as they get this done, essentially. So we have got now this caucus of cross-party support from all the major political parties. Lots of MPs from all of those parties now are supporting, and indeed prospective parliamentary candidates as we're starting to get towards the election, and that's great to see. So we're cross-party. There's various reasons also why we are cross-party, which I'll perhaps come on to. And finally, we're grassroots driven. What we mean by that is, sort of, forgive me, that's a bit of jargon. Really, it's driven by everyday people like us here in this room. It just basically means that actually it's people around the UK who are calling for this and going, this is a really good idea. We really want you to do this. You're our chosen representatives. Let's make this happen. So for me, the important bit is not necessarily assuming that people are really interested in the technical science necessarily always behind the climate and nature crises that we're facing. It's actually just about thinking, well, in 10 years' time, what are the benefits we're going to be seeing from this? And I think realistically, this will always change depending on your particular perspective on life, what kind of group you're in, and so on and so forth. But just to give you a few ideas of the things that we will be helping to create here with this new bill, we'll be helping solve our food and farming system here in the UK, which is quite broken in many respects in terms of the way we use our land, the way that actually we're relying on imports, we're not putting nutrients back into the soil. All these different things that the bill will help fix. We'll be restoring nature. I guess what I mean by that is, and obviously you saw at the end of the film, the UK is, I think England anyway, certainly is the 10th most nature depleted nation on Earth, which is pretty incredible. That's good in some respects. The Environment Act, is good in some respects because they're saying actually by 2030 we'll stop that destruction. But we don't think that's good enough. We think we need to reverse that destruction and go back to previous baseline levels. So we'll be restoring nature. We'll be helping create more green jobs. We'll be cleaning up our air. We'll be helping provide people with better mental health and well-being through experiencing a replenished nature. And the list goes on and on and on. But I think the point is that, what you take from it actually will be different depending on where you're coming from. Businesses will benefit in many different ways. There'll be more opportunities and more jobs created because of things like decarbonisation. If you're a parent, for example, you might be more interested in the fact that your kids will grow up and have great green spaces to play in, and they'll breathe in cleaner air. Those are just a couple of examples. But the point is, yes, laws can be quite dry things, but the point is that's just the intervention. That's the instrument by which we're getting this change made. This is really the stuff that we care about, that we want to happen. So why do we need a climate nature law? I guess I probably don't need to, I'm probably preaching to converts, I imagine, obviously, about the various different crises we're facing now at the planetary level. But fundamentally, when you start to think about this on a very local level, I'm sure you all shot this photo taken from Surrey Live. Effectively, in January, we had some of the worst flooding we've seen in years since, I believe, the 2013 floods here, which were obviously horrific. But these things aren't just happening just through natural cycles. This is being caused by climate breakdown. And therefore, there is this need to really get on with things and do things more urgently and do it as quickly as possible. A lot of things seem to have 2030 as a sort of an aimed for year, but realistically, we need to be doing this yesterday. So that's, I guess, I'm skipping through this very quickly because I know you all know about this, but fundamentally, that's the main driver why we need a new climate nature law. But realistically, there's also a thing going on here, which is also about the way legislation is currently set up. And it comes down to this idea, again, of the joined up approach. Because if you've got climate on the left, for example, nature on the right, at the moment, there's actually a massive dividing line between those. And that's simply because people aren't doing things at the governmental level in a systemically joined up way. And that also reflects down into the way different ministries and departments are working. DESNES and DEFRA, of course, they do speak to each other, but things aren't done in that very holistic whole of government approach, which means actually we're not getting all the combined benefits of actually that kind of joined up working. So that's a real issue. And of course, when you're thinking about climate and nature, you really, really can't solve one without the other. For example, you can't solve the climate crisis without obviously addressing the destruction of nature. If you're having big carbon sinks that are naturally formed, like big peatland bogs, for example, they're really great at storing carbon. So we want to make sure that we're not losing those. So you have to make sure that the dual strategies that are employed do take into account both things. But I guess in terms of actual legislation, at the moment, we're in a situation, where we'll start with climate, where the UK's effectively off track now. We do have the Climate Change Act. Many of you I'm sure will remember that was passed in 2008. That was world leading at the time, but one of the problems we've got right now is that doesn't even reflect the 2015 Paris Agreement sort of maximum target really to stay within a 1.5 degree temperature increase, and obviously that's globally. So that's a key problem for us. Now this graph here shows where we're at in terms of carbon emissions. This is as the UK. The blue line at the moment, the one tracking through the middle, is where we should be at. So that's called our national carbon budget. That's set every 5 years. And effectively, unfortunately, where the IPCC wants us to be is actually where the green line is. And so that's our sort of ambition. They're saying, listen, we have to do this as fast as possible. Let's make sure we do this responsibly. And therefore, let's reduce emissions as drastically as possible, as quickly as possible, and effectively glide in gently towards 2050. Whereas actually what's happening at the moment, red lines, we're ballooning way over in our own national carbon budget, and that's obviously a problem. Now, the government of the day is saying, hey, that's fine, don't worry, we'll still get to net zero by 2050. I'm sure we will, but I'm sure you don't need to be a mathematician in the room to realise that that means twice as many emissions following that line versus doing what the green line is telling us to. So that's a big, big, big challenge for us. And of course, I'm sure those of you follow it, of course, for the second time now, Planet Earth, the Good Law Project, and Friends of the Earth have all taken the government to court over their net zero strategy and won't, because it's seen as not fit for purpose to make sure we get there or get there or talking about. So this is a bit of an issue. I guess a couple of other things. At the moment, you'll all have heard of a lot of the clever sort of emissions calculations that are taken to get us through where we are seen to be in terms of our roadmap. Unfortunately, still it's a situation where international emissions or associated emissions, such as shipping and international aviation, they're still not taken into account, but they're massive. So we need to make sure our bill would do that. We also want to do things in a fair and equitable way. So we only have, as one planet, one carbon budget. There is a debate, I admit, as to whether that's even gone, but we tend to lean on this and think, well, actually, if there is a carbon budget still left, we need to make sure we're only, as the UK, taking our fair share of that carbon budget. At the moment, we don't do that. We've just essentially just set it ourselves, and that's fine. But if everyone took our approach, we'd have smashed it within the next few weeks, effectively. So that's really critical. On the nature side of things still aren't that good. A lot of organisations work really hard actually in lobbying the government to get through the Environment Act. This is not about doing existing legislation down, by the way. I mean, it's good to have anything, frankly, but it's still not going far enough. And actually, one of the things with the Environment Act, as I said before, is that it's saying, yes, we need to stop the destruction of nature in the UK, which is great. That's by 2030. But we need to reverse that. We want to get back to good times, right? We need to make sure that we're bringing back these habitats and ecosystems and doing that in a really, really responsive way. So that's a key thing for the Environment Act. It's not seen as doing that. So the Climate and Nature Bill would effectively address that. And there's a few other things too. Actually, the Environment Act tends to sort of look at it through quite a narrow lens, talks about species a lot rather than actually entire habitats and ecosystems. So that's problematic. We see nature, just as you saw with our Toad Watch film, as we call it. It's obviously about the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the soil that we grow food in, and plants and other such things. So that's really important that we have that. And then the final point on this, I promise I'll move on, is that actually it's really important when you think about, particularly if you think about the world of business today, we are a globalised economy. And particularly here in the UK, we are definitely at the forefront of that. But of course, our ecological damage, our footprint is often very benignly called, is actually often caused in countries far, far away from here. And so actually we have a responsibility, I think anyway, and we think as an organisation, to make sure that we're actually taking that into account. So it would also be addressing that ecological negative footprint too. So this is why we need this. There is stuff out there at the moment, there's legislation that exists, but it's not ambitious enough and it's not fit for purpose fundamentally. So in summary, the bill itself, by the way, I can send it around to everyone. It's actually really short. I think it's only sort of 10 pages long. And the actual real sort of content is probably only about 2 pages, because the key thing here is that actually we're not here to set the policy for politicians. They're the experts at doing that. It's also a great way to make sure that we get cross-party support, because people can't go, oh, I don't like that policy, count me out. It's been really good at working in that sort of way, that mechanic of saying, actually, we're going to set targets, but we're not necessarily going to set policy and tell you how to do it. Because as with most things in life, the strategy and the roadmap for how you solve something, there's many different options and different ways you can get there. So really it's about setting out key provisions. And the main headlines are, without perhaps getting into too much technical detail, as I said before already, it's creating this joined-up plan addressing climate and nature together. We're going to cut emissions in line with 1.5 degrees C, which frankly at the moment, bless you, we're not doing right now. We're going to halt and reverse nature's decline, as I just said. We're going to take responsibility for our overseas footprint, and that's obviously in terms of emissions and also ecological damage. We're going to prioritise nature in decision making and also end fossil fuel production and imports as rapidly as possible. And this one's quite important to me. I think it's important that we don't leave anyone behind, and what we mean by that is that we actually think it's really important and valid, therefore, that if, for example, we're going to move away from a fossil fuel-based economy, we actually make sure that we look after the people who may lose jobs in that transition as well, that they're retrained and reskilled to do other such things in the green economy. And finally, and I'd like to think you citizens here, you are citizens, you've got real power. And actually one of the things we want to do is make sure that we involve the public in this. We want to make sure that there's a fair way forwards whereby a cross-section of the public are given fair voice and are able to make recommendations to politicians. And this is what we call, I don't think this man will be involved, sadly, by the time the law comes out, but essentially a Climate and Nature Citizens Assembly is one of our key provisions of the bill as well. So this is moving away from the science and the actual legislation now. This is just about simply saying as an instrument, which we think is really important to make sure that actually we're doing things in a fair way and making sure we take all of society with us, which is really crucial to making this a success. So forgive me if you already know what Citizens Assembly is, but a few key points on this here. Effectively, it's a randomly selected representative group of society. So this would be the population at large as it in 2025, 2026, when this will become law. And they will be there to really make recommendations on particular issues. And obviously in this case, it's obviously always to do with climate and nature. And they will make those recommendations to the politicians of the day. I should just say, they're not decision makers. They don't, unfortunately, necessarily always replicate, what MPs do. But they're really, really important. And we've seen this in other countries work really well so far. So as I say, always representative, so many different lenses of diversity, of course, that we have to take into account, whether that's gender, ethnicity, social class, where you live, all of those things are really important. And for those of you perhaps a bit more cued into what's been happening in the last few years, there was something called People's Plan for Nature, which was led by a few different organisations such as the WWF. And they did some great work on citizens' assemblies as well and put forward recommendations. So it really does show that these kind of things are useful. But yeah, they're informed by experts, so don't worry, you wouldn't just be getting lots of people in a room who know nothing about these issues going, well, we should do this. Obviously that would be uninformed. So they'll be informed by experts, randomly selected, and usually take anywhere between 10 days and potentially a month as well. As I said, purpose ultimately is to try and inform policy and make recommendations to those final decision makers. So, how's the campaign going so far? So we've been going for 3 years. As a private member's bill, it's fairly typical, I would say, to be in existence for around 6 years. Now, the problem, of course, we've got with this particular topic is, and we used to be called the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, because it is an emergency. But actually, at the moment, unfortunately, a lot of politicians wanted to knock the edges off it, didn't want to think about it as an emergency, and therefore, obviously, we've had to sort of take that approach. But of course, we know this is needed right now. So the movement that we've been building now has been going for the last 3 years. And I guess politically, we've obviously been gaining great momentum within both the House of Lords and the House of Commons. We've got 180 parliamentarians combined in terms of MPs and peers now are supporting the bill. That's great. But what's given us real energy to our campaign, I'm going to talk more in detail about this in a second, is that we've now got a lot of the candidates who are going to be standing for election in the next general election, which, if I gaze into my crystal ball, will probably be October or November, if our sources tell us correctly. But effectively now we've got 830 PPCs, as are known, prospective parliamentary candidates, on board saying, we think this is a good idea. If we get into power, we are definitely backing the bill. That's great to see. That, by the way, that figure, just to put it in proportionate terms, is 25% of all the available candidates. So that.
Local in support?
Angela, as far as I know, isn't at the moment, but it doesn't mean that she won't be.
May I ask you who is behind Zero Hour? Who set it up?
So, of course. Do you mind if you hold on to that question?
Yeah,
maybe because we should have said that at the start. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, so you can and then read as many questions. But I promise I will. So yeah, we've got broad support from most of the political parties at the moment. Labour as a party and Conservatives as a party haven't yet fully backed it. I think we're quite significant way with Labour, but not so much with the Tories yet. And we've also got lots of different organisations, whether that's trade unions, businesses, youth groups, NGOs, all saying, yes, this is a good idea. We want to call for this as well. So 841 at current counting as of this morning. 368 local councils have passed motions to. And the thing that I think is really cool, we are a science-led piece of legislation. And scientists are incredibly intelligent people. Obviously, the climate and nature scientists that we've been liaising with when we wrote the bill took extreme time over getting the detail right. But what's great is, I remember them telling this at the time, scientists very rarely get back behind legislation or policy. Everyone thinks this is a good idea. We now have probably the biggest ambassadorial group of scientists of any other group in the UK at the moment. So over 200 scientists have basically said, yes, we stand for this. If you want to find out who they are, go to our website. There's a long list of various luminaries, including Professor Tim Jackson, who's at the University of Surrey at the road. So, James, why is this going to work? Why is it you're taking this approach? Why are you building at this movement and pressuring politicians in this way? Well, I guess the thing we would do first off, and I'll talk to you a bit more about our strategy in a second, is to say, well, actually, you know what? This is a tried and tested method. It has worked before. It will work again. So for those of you around at the time, in about 06, 07, so quite a few years ago now, almost two decades ago, there was a big campaign called The Big Ask, which was fronted by Friends of the Earth and various other organisations. They campaigned really hard, and they got through the Climate Change Act 2008, which, as I said before, was world leading at the time. And that was principally through public mobilisation, and around 170,000 people called for that law. If you think about this in comparable terms now, we've got about 43,000 supporters. We're not quite at that scale of movement just yet, but they campaigned really hard for a couple of years, but got it through, and that was really, really gratifying to see. Also, in more recent memory, I think this may have been one of Theresa May's last acts, I think, as Prime Minister. In May 2019, so pre-COVID, an organisation called the Climate Coalition, which represents 100 plus organisations across the UK interested in climate action, they were the ones who basically lobbied MPs physically in Westminster. So 12,000 people descended. Some of you may have even been there actually on that day. Descended in May 2019 on Westminster and said, listen, MP, we want you to do this. And this was all about enshrining the net zero target deadline of 2050 in law. And of course, it actually happened remarkably quickly. Probably a simpler ask, you might say, in some respects. 2050 still seemed quite far off then, it still does now, to be honest with you. And actually, one of the things is we want to make sure that 2050 deadline is now broad screening into the future, into the near future more. But it was still a really, really big win at the time. And it showed that public mobilisation, your voice as citizens, does the job. It works because fundamentally, we may have some politicians in the room here as well. Politicians, you're here to represent your constituents, and actually the good ones listen to those people and act on their will and opinion. So that's great to see. And what's been really nice about the 0 hour campaign for this bill is it's been really driven by collective action that's been crucial to our success so far. So here's a quick montage of various different images of activities and open letters being handed in, all sorts of different things with MPs, with engaging other citizens, members of the public. And they've been crucial to this because fundamentally, you'll probably, if you're interested in this area as well, you'll know that actually the best way of communicating now is often keeping it local, keeping it relevant, using trusted voices, trusted messages. And often it is about the people down the road that you know and who talk in terms of a local context that makes it grounded and feel like, yes, okay, I understand this now. I understand the benefits. I understand why I should feel invested in this. This is how I'm going to benefit. And these people have been brilliant. So they've got us to the success so far that we've had and the progress so far, which has been phenomenal. And you know what's really great about this? It's just so enthusiastic to think, you're not alone. There's 43,000 people out there, just like yourselves, who go, you know what, this climate and nature bill, I want this to happen. I recognise this is good for the future, good for me, good for the UK. And then, we've literally, bless the poor person now to put this together, they had to map out exactly where our supporter bases were. As you can see, there's no sort of weird sort of southeast, concentricity here. It's a genuinely UK-wide movement. I have been told that across all 650 constituencies, we've got at least one supporter in every single one. Obviously, some have several hundred in. I think Bristol West is our biggest one. But that's really gratifying, I think, to hear. So I'm going to talk about systemic change. Sorry, that's a bit jargonistic, but I guess systems change is really, for me, is how we can get things done in a fashion that means things are working together, things are working at scale, and also we can pool our resources to make things happen more quickly, which is what we really need in this situation. A lot of organisations, climate deniers, and climate delayers are now saying, hey, it's all about you, it's about your individual behaviour change. It's not for me to ever say that it isn't. Individual behaviour change is good. It also helps put pressure on businesses and companies to change what they do as well and how they offer it. But if we're going to do this at the speed we need to, we also need to make sure it also comes top down. And that's why we believe our particular instrument is law, because we recognise if the government says something, set regulations and policies, it will happen far more quickly and far more effectively. So what's your role in that? You have a very, very, very important role. So this is me, let's just say, zero-hour team and our campaigners, our swarthy band of 43,000 people. What has been great about our campaigners is they've then gone, you know what, we're going to go and talk to our communities. We're going to get out there and get people interested in the bill, aware of it, make sure they understand why it's good for them. And they've been phenomenally effective at doing that. So they've now got more people on board. So they're mobilised. Now, what's great now is the handshake symbol represents you as citizens, as everyday people, basically meeting with your prospective parliamentary candidates, meeting with your incumbent MPs and saying, in a very, very peaceful but direct way, listen, this is something that we really want. Actually, us as constituents will benefit. Please go and represent this and please get behind it. And obviously that's why we've now got 180 parliamentarians behind the bill, which is phenomenal progress. And so essentially that piece has happened. And now what we need to do, of course, is make sure that we get enough MPs in the House of Commons. We think it's going to be around a sort of slight majority, would be about 320 MPs. That if it comes to, there's a few different ways this could play out, but if it's something called a ballot bill situation, where MPs are essentially asked to vote on whether this becomes an act of parliament, becomes a law, then actually we need about 320 MPs. So we're probably just shy of about 140 MPs at the moment. So we've got to do at least, well, it's over double. So we've got to get there. We need more MPs on board. But of course, once we get them on board, the law's made. Part of the bill, when you read it, will say there's a strategy which a new Secretary of State would have to devise. And essentially, once it's devised, of course, then implement it. And that's when the magic happens. That's when we have this systemic change. It's triggered. It's mutually reinforcing. It probably gains greater groundswell and more effectiveness, the way that things click into gear with each other, and we have this big change happen. So that's going to benefit all of us, right here in this room, here in Guildford, here in Surrey, and of course the UK. So, James, tell me about the big opportunity. The big opportunity, of course, this year is the general election. Technically, could be January next year. I'm personally hoping it isn't. That's a long way away. But I think it probably will be the autumn, unless a snap election is called for June. There's a big opportunity to gain more MPs. So if you go back to what I just said, we need more of those MPs on board saying, yes, the CAN bill is something I want, and it's something we're going to call for. So the general election is a big opportunity for us to do that. Now, why is it a big opportunity? It becomes essentially, look at this. I'm going to leave my cynicism at the door. Effectively, your MP should be here to represent your interests, right? So therefore, if you're a candidate who's now looking to gain a seat, or perhaps if it's the incumbent and they're trying to make sure they get re-elected, they're probably on their most, I would say anyway, all MPs are always listening, but they're probably on their most receptive, I would argue, to listening to what are the key issues and the key demands of their constituents. Okay, so that's really important. So if we get as many of those candidates as possible backing the bill, then actually just pure statistics means, particularly if we focus in on the ones most likely to win, that therefore we'll get this hockey stick increase in the number of MPs come day one of the new government. So it's a very, very simple strategy for this year, but that's what we're trying to do. So with that in mind, I'm going to sort of show you this in a second. We've devised an open letter mechanic. There are 650 pages that sit behind this landing page of this website. Effectively, you'll pop in your postcode here, and it will then take you to the page for your constituency. So obviously, Guildford's here, you have your candidates along the top. There's a sort of a signature tracker along the right-hand side, saying how many people have signed it. What's really great, I'd say Guildford at the moment isn't one of our best pages, being honest with, but lots of constituencies have got lots of different local organisations who've signed up and said, yeah, this is a great thing, we want it as well. Very pleased to see Zero Carbon's logo there, which is great. And effectively, the candidates, because it is a letter to the candidates, it's not about citizens, it's saying, dear candidates, this is what we are calling for. And it's all about being better off, being healthier, being happier, being more resilient. And essentially, our call is to those PPCs to say, please get behind this. And as I said before, we're seeing great strides being made already. I think in just about under 2 months, this is the progress we've made. 830 candidates have now said, yeah, count me in, I'm behind this. And that's, I think technically it's 24.7%, but I've rounded it up to 25. So it's a quarter of all available candidates so far. So the next 25% is what we're aiming for. And hopefully we can bring on board a couple more NPCs here in Guildford, to that effect. So, before I finish, what can you do? Well, firstly, of course, this is totally up to you, but if you don't already know about it or you weren't a supporter, please do sign up as an individual supporter. That would be brilliant. I can give you details in a second. Promote the what we call the constituency action page. So for Guildford, so that's the URL there, action.zerohour.uk/Guildford. Send it to your friends, send it to your family, put it on the street WhatsApp group. Everyone's got one of those in Guildford. So really just push it out, because actually everyone will take something slightly different from it as well. And you don't have to be a pure environmentalist to sort of think this is a good idea. This is good for livelihoods, it's good for lives, it's good for our future. And then finally, if you're someone who'd like to get out and about a bit more, there is a big nature march which is happening in London, in Westminster, on the 22nd of June. This is called the Restore Nature Now March, and if you're one of our supporters, you'll receive comms anyway about this. But you can join our sort of block in the march, calling for the Climate and Nature Bill as well. Just a peaceful rally, grouping together probably quite a few thousand people, I should expect, in Westminster. All really, I guess, as a headline, calling for the reversal of destruction of nature in the UK, which of course is one of our targets for the bill. So yeah, lots to get involved with. And if you're a real campaigner sort, there's all sorts of very interesting things and cool things you can do for the campaign. But just as very basics, these are some sort of easy things you can do when you're watching EastEnders on a night, flicking through your phone, sending these things out, signing it. So yeah, please do get involved. I believe now Thomas is going to let me field some questions. I can be here for as long or as little as you wish, and then we might even just show you the actual constituency action page.
Would you tell us who's behind Zero?
Yes, I was going to come to you first. So effectively, well, we have, just like any organisation, there's a board of directors. They're around then, but who started it?
Yeah.
I think the first person was one of our current co-directors, Dr. Amy McDonnell. She convened effectively a group of lawyers and scientists. She did it, I think, in partnership with someone called Charles Secret, who was one of the ex-Friends of the Earth directors, not any longer, but effectively they sort of went around the sort of various different sort of NGOs, campaign groups, and picked up people they thought might be interested and kind of went on from there, really. But it's a very small team, mainly run by volunteers. I used to be a volunteer. I think we're FTE equivalent of about 5.5 people, I think. So it's a tiny group. Go.
So, I mean, yeah, it all sounds great in practice, but I do notice that you've mentioned all the positives, of course, as you're promoting it, and of course it's going to come with some trade-offs, and a lot of the time, particularly these nature protection bills, it kind of means that all development is sort of slowed down, even if it's like green stuff. And I guess I also do worry about, okay, well, this law will be passed, and then it'll just, but when a minister tries to, do certain policies, it'll just be endlessly litigated. And I don't know. I mean, why can't we just have some standardized rules about development, and will this sort of disrupt kind of green energy production and infrastructure projects?
Yeah, a lot of very interesting points there, and I think I'd probably be the first person to say there's no such thing as a perfect world. I think in terms of impact on planning laws, things like that, obviously we've seen some people call them rollbacks in the last 18 months by two prime ministers, and some people did see that as, hang on, aren't you stopping us from progressing and from growing? But of course that's one perspective on it. I think the key thing is to do it in harmony with nature. I don't think anyone's saying that you can't have good growth in a sense, but it just has to be sustainable. It has to be done within the realms of what we as a living planet can still bear. I don't think that anyone at this stage is saying that actually in our bill we don't want any growth, we don't want society still to thrive. I think it's probably quite the opposite. But I guess the key thing is, I'm not sure I can really answer your question, because fundamentally it will be down to the Secretary of State, who then implements and says, well, this is the strategy we'll take to make sure we're hitting those policies, to make sure we're hitting those targets. Sorry, I should say. So it's a good point you raise. I don't think there's anything that at this stage we can really comment on because there's not anything that's been passed. We haven't seen what that strategy will look like. As I said before, I guess there's various different ways you could approach it. It's a good point. I don't know who's first. Sorry, Yoga.
So it's about your point about the election being an opportunity and using the candidates as a target.
Sure.
But when they announce the election, doesn't Parliament dissolve and then doesn't the bill get washed out?
So that happens every time essentially. So we actually had, it was on the 21st of March, the bill was reintroduced into the House of Commons. It's been reintroduced probably 5 times now, I think. So that's more about the fact that it's not, I mean, some people might say, oh, it's failing, but that's just a standard cycle that most bills do pass through. Will get bounced around between the Lords and the Commons. I don't think it's necessarily an issue that actually it'll be recess time as the election's called and that Parliament's dissolved. Actually, this is more about making sure that actually we've got pledges from the right people, so that when they are then in power, then they'll take it forwards. There's nothing. I mean, just to be transparent, it's not like as a result of so many people saying yes, we'll back it on day one of the new government, so that it becomes law. We've still got a lot of hard yards to sort of get through, even once that new government's in power, essentially. But the key thing for us now is just simply securing support, effectively.
So the same bill gets retabled at the beginning?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
With maybe a different private member tabling it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've had Green, Lib Dem, and Labour all introduced those parties. Most recent of which was May. Last year we had Olivia Blake from Sheffield, she's Labour, and then most recently in March this year we had Alex Sobel from Leeds, he's Labour as well. So, but it's always introduced with a cross-party sort of representation. So although there'll be one main sponsor who stands up and introduces, there'll always be people from every single party, including Conservatives, I should add as well, because people often very hard on the Tories and say they don't support anything. That's not true. They just don't support as a party.
Well, if I may, on that point, there's only 3 MPs from the Tory party
Yeah,
signed up.
that's correct.
So,
well, that is people.
I mean, do you want to comment on that? The fact that it seems to be not particularly popular amongst.
You can probably work out for yourself a bit, I think, can't you? I mean, I think essentially they're following probably what their party is believing in. It's not really, as I say, we're a cross-party bill. It's not for me to comment on the Conservatives' approach.
I mean, the reason I'm pushing on that a bit is, sorry to push on this, but is because we are in a bit of a Tory stronghold around here. And I mean, should we as a tactic be targeting them a bit harder so they do, or should we just forget about that and target the candidates instead?
I think that's down to you as voters.
Okay.
It really, yeah. Not to sidestep the question, but it's just that we're not here to sort of comment on how people should vote. I think it's more about, people should vote
I'm not talking
to.
about voting. I'm talking about if we were to use the bill as a way of like engaging.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would have thought so. I mean, I know that, in theory, I always think candidates are humans. So, do you approach them on a human level, to begin with, work out what their interests are, what's the sort of the net gain they can get from supporting something like this at the local level. But, be aware that obviously at the party level, there will always be certain mandates being placed on people, the whips. Some people may feel they can't come out and support something like this, but we know that's not true because we do have some Tories. We, as you say, not many. But.
3 MPs. Okay, thank you.
Just adding to that one, private members' bills, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert, effectively come forward through a sort of lottery. They're not picked by anybody; they're picked out of the hat, more or less. So, and I think there's a very high percentage of them never get heard.
Mm.
So, what can you do about that? I mean, are we just going to leave this to the lottery?
Well, I think I guess because as have been heard, we are sort of getting through that. If you see what I mean. So, I mean, one of the things that we often hear, you might hear, if you're interested in this subject matter, is private members' bills often don't go anywhere. That's not technically true at all. In fact, one of our advisors has worked on 20 private members' bills, which have become law. It's just that it's still about how you make sure you secure the right support. So I think it's more about how you can do that rather than necessarily relying on the lottery. But as I say, we've been through the system, I think it's 6 times now, But it's, yeah, so which proves, I guess, there is interest in it, allied with the support that we've obviously got so far. So go for it.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Wood from Farnborough, Blackpool's Valley Friends of the Earth, and just want to introduce myself that I'm not from Guildford. That's the first thing. I've come here to network and see what you're about. And nobody in Rushmore, which is where I come from, Rushmore's a bit different to Guildford, it is. Our biggest emitters in Rushmore are the crematorium and Farnborough Airfield, but we can't do too much about those. But we've also got, and it's been said in Guildford, after that it's traffic, transport, and just losing energy from buildings. And everybody likes nature. It's a very easy route to people's hearts. But unless we do something about our emissions and therefore climate change, nature's going to go. And it's when I first sort of sat here, the first slide, it was nature, farming, great, really good. But it's how to just say, look, we've got to change, we've got to walk and cycle, we've got to use public transport, we've got to insulate our homes, otherwise nature's gonna fall off the planet anyway. I'm not asking for answers, I'm just saying where I am at.
Yeah.
And I do appreciate that nature's the way in. That's all I want to
That's
say,
a
really.
great opinion, and pleased that Friends of the Earth, we're a big supporters as well, so that's
So
great.
if anybody else is from Farnborough, come and say hello.
Yeah, I think you're right about the nature piece as well, because it's place-based, it's tangible, people care about it, get more emotive. It's quite difficult with emissions, which, let's face it, you might emit here, it very quickly becomes global. So I think the key thing is making sure that you bring people in that way, but then explain the intersection, between climate and nature and why both have to be addressed.
And migration.
Yeah. Tom.
The question first to the audience, can people put their hands up if they're volunteers here? Just quick.
In this building?
Yeah, it's for zero, basically, most. So yeah, to point out, Zero Carbon Guildford has supported this bill for at least a couple of years. I think it was the first things we might have done when it came together. Is that right, Ben? But it's the first time I've, properly heard about it and got to learn about it. As volunteers, what can we do if convinced by James's lovely talk? What can we do to actually help with it? Is it about telling everyone and my mum, or is it about going and annoying Jeremy and Angela, or the other people that have not shown support yet?
Sure. I think the single best thing that everyone can do would literally be go to this website here. This is your constituency action page for Guildford, and sign it. Takes literally 60 seconds. And then just share that with as many people as you can, and tell them about the bill. I think that's the key thing, because the more impetus we put behind these pages, the more candidates will come on board. And the numbers, 830 people, that hasn't happened, through sheer luck. It's by our own efforts as a team, galvanising people such as yourselves, and actually making sure that candidates are listening and going, okay, great, this is actually quite important to people. And sometimes, I think it's like 81 for Guildford. It doesn't sound many people, but actually candidates are often convinced on certain things, but when they're written to 50 times, this is, 80 people are certain here in the constituency, but it's also about the organisations, the groups who get behind it. There's some fantastic ones. If you look at Shrewsbury's, it's off the charts. There must be sort of 50 organisations who signed up, because we've got very active campaigners there. But that definitely is convincing candidates to go, okay, maybe this is something that I think is something I should get behind. And one of the things that we always hear anecdotally, I can't cite names for obvious reasons, but we've heard time and time again, MPs, so before the election year, last year, MPs were sort of saying, yeah, it does sound good. I probably should be getting behind this. And we so will you declare your support? And the ones who didn't were often saying, The reason is because I'm not convinced it's enough of a priority issue for my constituents. Literally because they just haven't heard about it from enough people. And there's lots of reasons for that, because people are thinking, worrying quite rightly about cost of living and energy bills and energy security and all these different things. But I guess the problem that we've got to solve, perhaps on behalf of everyone else, because it's a communications challenge as much as anything else, is to make sure that people understand the links between all of these different issues. And when you do that, people then go, great, makes sense, I'm buying it.
Will the bill extend to some economic shifts? For example, I don't know if you saw Country Trial a few weeks ago, where there was a clip on the sugar cane farmers and the bees. In fact, every year this happens, it's been going on for years, where they just continue to allow these phosphate, non-bee friendly or insect friendly insecticides. And it's annihilating our insects, which we need to pollinate things to create food. And yet here it is, all about supporting sugarcane, which isn't particularly good for us, but obviously it's going to be the economy. It's worth a certain amount of money. Well, why hasn't there been a shift with those farmers and those crops to something else that's more sustainable, less harmful to us, less harmful to bees? Do you think the bill will support these sorts of shifts that we need to create?
I think it will ultimately. I mean, so many of these, it's like a huge Venn diagram, isn't it? Because obviously that's linked to diets, lots of processed food, sugars, fats, and so on.
It's the economy that's driving it.
But it's the economy that's driving it, marketing behind that, and so on and so forth. But if you think about it at the global level, there was something sort of a year and a half ago now that was that happened in Montreal. It was the global biodiversity framework, it was called, was set. Really, really fascinating and very, very worthwhile piece of international agreement was made. And this was very much around all the nations who signed up also saying, yes, we're going to halt the destruction of nature and reverse it. The UK signed up, but obviously hasn't necessarily brought that home in terms of policy and legislation on UK soil. But I think what's interesting is part of that global biodiversity framework, there's so much else that's packed into there in terms of like water quality and soil and all of these different things that form part of these precious ecosystems and habitats. And I think if we get that through, if we make sure we're reflecting what we agreed to at the global level and bring that home to the UK, then actually, yes, I guess as a result of that, you would then see different shifts. But they would be positive ones, because actually the knock-on impacts there would be on things like diets, health, the way that we live, so on and so forth as well. But I also know that these things are highly complex. They're part of this system change picture that I talked about. And that's why we do need to have it at this sort of very top level. It's no good just sort of individual companies going out and doing this on their own. There needs to be regulation that's put in place. Gosh, so many questions.
I just really wanted to encourage people. So I should probably say that from the start, I'm actually Zoe Franklin. I'm the Lieutenant here in Guildford, and I have signed up for this bill. But one of the reasons that I signed up was because I was first introduced to it by the team at Zero. I wouldn't have known it existed if it wasn't for the Zero team. I would strongly encourage you to contact your local candidates of all political persuasions, because they may not know about it yet. You might be that person who introduces them to it and changes their mind. And someone else in the audience mentioned that Surrey is a, I don't know what county you were talking about, but you mentioned it as a conservative stronghold. I would encourage you to look very carefully across Surrey, particularly at the moment. This is a fairly unique opportunity, I think, for the bill, but also politically, it's a fairly unique election, I think. And there is an opportunity for change, and that is not a party political plug. This is simply, please look, there is change afoot, and you can be part of encouraging your candidates to look at this bill and support it, and that can bring the change in Parliament. And thank you so much, it's really, really helpful.
Thanks, Thank you. I did see a flurry of hands. First at the back, so I don't ignore it.
Yeah, you mentioned quite a lot about the Climate Change Act and how even though it was passed, it hasn't necessarily led to much action. I was just curious how you think that this is going to be different, and even if it's once it's passed, that it's not going to be the same situation happening again, where we have this incredible bill that has the support, but when it really comes down to it, it doesn't bring about the change that we need.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good point. And I don't think, I haven't said that climate change hasn't had any effect. I mean, it definitely has, but it's not fit for purpose right now in 2024. I mean, I think it's a great question. It's only once one person before you has only ever asked me that, and I think you're right, because we could be cynical and go, well, actually, I mean, let's face it, the government are now getting taken to court by groups like ours, and they're losing. What's the actual impact for them? You know, what's the sort of the default penalty? I mean, they are our chosen government. I'm not sure there's a really easy way to answer that. You've got people like Chris Packham obviously sort of forcing through judicial reviews now on certain things as well. It's great to see all this. It shouldn't be needed, but I think for those of you who sort of keeping an eye on sort of litigation scene now, it's becoming something that globally is becoming quite prevalent. Obviously, lots of different groups, you know, are now coming to the fore and saying, actually, we're not going to stand for this anymore. We'll make a case and we'll be heard and we'll win. And I think there probably will be a tipping point, I would have thought, at some point when actually, you know, there will be some kind of mechanisms or interventions or penalties of some description, which means actually they just can't get away with it. I'm not sure I'd be the best person to really explain how and what that looks like. I do share your concerns as a citizen. I kind of go, God, we could get this through, and then just nothing happens. But I suppose my view, that's something idealistic, is we have to try, and this is a great way to try.
You mentioned the Climate Coalition. There was a report, I think, a couple of months ago that said they think Guildford is one of 24 constituencies where small g green issues could sway the election. Do you personally or the local Zero Hour group have any sort of thoughts on that? I should say I'm the Green PPC for Guildford.
Yeah, no, okay, great. I mean, it could be, again, I'm not sure it's my place to comment on what might happen politically, but I think what I'm thinking right now as a citizen rather than as a campaigner is I'm thinking if you've got any interest in this sort of stuff, there's going to be the biodiversity COP and the climate COP almost probably bookending the election. You know, a lot of people are saying this is going to be the climate election. A lot of people say, no, it's not. But I think realistically, it's more about how you can join the dots between a lot of the big issues that are really based around inequalities, really, when it comes down to it, that are linked to climate and nature breakdown. And I think that, I suppose, yes, Guildford could be one of those top 25 where it might make a difference. But I'd like to think that actually, across the board, changes could happen if people actually understand what the linkages are between all these issues. Because I think a lot of people are still going, and it's fair because it's a communications problem as much as something else. Are kind of going, yeah, I'm not really into climate and nature stuff, but are you into like having good livelihoods, you know, clean air, you know, having nature to go out and walk in? People sort of going, well, yeah, I am. Right, well, okay. So you need to understand the linkages. So I think, yeah, I don't want to necessarily comment on, sorry, if you don't sidestep your question a bit, but I'd like to think that in theory that applies everywhere. And I would definitely encourage you to always think about these issues, you know, in your daily life anyway, not just when you're coming to voting. I'm getting good to sidestepping these political questions. Yeah, sorry, lady about me.
Hi, I should probably introduce myself. So I'm Helen McGuire, and the parliamentary candidate for the Liberal Democrats at next from you. So I'm a little bit far from home.
Sure.
And I've signed up to Bill as well.
Right.
I guess in Europe at the moment, what we're seeing in Germany, for example, is far right in Germany, and they're starting to protest about various climate change issues. Also, farms in France, for example, they're coming out and protesting. And you did mention, obviously, the importance of bringing the public along with us, which, as you can see in Europe at the moment, is incredibly important. And so I just wondered what your thoughts are in terms of how we, as politicians, because obviously this is the macro, this is the strategy here, but then there are policies that can come out of this. So what do we need to do to actually bring the public along with us?
That is the big question, isn't it? I think realistically, I could probably only really comment from a citizen's perspective. And I think it is really making sure that actually, for many years now, perhaps more than we actually realise, we've often been fed misinformation or we're being confused by different things. And I think politicians, I feel, have a responsibility just to stand up, be very clear and transparent about the facts as they see it, and actually to try and actually, again, bring out these linkages, I think. Because I think when people are presented with good facts and good information, people are perfectly able to make up their own minds about what's right and wrong for them. But I think right now, because of the way that things are playing out, particularly on social media, particularly still in mainstream media, obviously things are always twisted and given a certain spin. And I think therefore it's quite difficult now for people of any walk of life to actually make really truly informed decisions. So I think this might sound a bit idealistic, but I think to whatever extent politicians have still got to try to actually cut through the noise, cut through the spin, and try and present things as transparently and as factually as possible. I appreciate that is very much a holy grail in some respects, isn't it? But I think that's the only way, because when you often sit down with people and get beyond their initial stereotypes or thought, preconceptions about things, actually people often will come on board. There's lots of groups out there right now in the UK that are sort of well drilled, offer training courses, guides about how to have good climate conversations with people. It often doesn't start with talking about the climate. You might start with, your interest. You might go to the football and go, oh, great. Well, have you ever heard about that team called Forest Green Rovers? One day. Oh, okay, well, they just got relegated from the league this week. Oh, you laugh about that. You go, do you know much about them? Who's behind them? Tell some interesting tales about the pitch, those kind of things. And then go, by the way, do you realise this is really good for X, Y, and Z? You work backwards. And I think sometimes that's a nice way to kind of engage people on their own interests. I appreciate I'm probably talking to a very specific set of people here in the room without making preconceptions about you all, but you've probably all got an interest in this stuff. Lots of people haven't. Lots of people are really worried about lots of other things in life. We just need to make those linkages. Sorry to sound like a broken record. I've said that probably 3 or 4 times now, but I think that is the best thing.
Also, I think just sort of specific for Surrey. So we really get tricked into thinking there's less support for stuff than there is. But across, we've done research at work, and 68% of Surrey residents, out of a decent sized sample, rated it extremely or very important to take action on climate and nature. There's the study in Nature that you've probably seen that globally across 125,000 people, is it? People massively underestimate other people's willingness to contribute by about 25%. And even in the UK, over a third of people would donate 1% of their own personal income to tackling climate change. So we massively underestimate that. And there's some really good updated research come out of Britain Talks Climate of what percentage of people oppose major policies like charging farmers for putting extra subsidies on farmers who aren't moving towards the ELMS, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, road support for road active travel and public transport, taking road space away from cars is like 4 times more who support that than oppose it. So although we only hear things from like a fairly vested set of sources in the national media, the actual widespread support for it is much higher than we think.
Yeah.
So I'll send you some of those things.
Right. Anyone else, or should we wait there?
I just wondered, do you have an idea, a sense of when it might finally go through and be passed?
I mean, I think, parliamentary processes are painfully slow, but I think that first sort of 12 months of the new government, I think will be critical. And I would like to think that we could get it done by the end of next year. That's sort of our thinking and ambitions at the moment. Should it have been done 3 years ago? Of course. But I think the reality is we've got to work with that process and that sort of roadmap. I think beyond that, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because I think everyone is now thinking that this next government we all elect will probably be our last best chance to avoid a lot of these critical tipping points. It doesn't mean that it'll also be Armageddon on the 1st of January 2030, but it just means we've gone past a lot of these critical tipping points, which means it's going to be really hard to kind of claw back from there. So you would hope, you would hope that the sense will be seen, but obviously, whoever that government will be, it depends on what they're doing with their budget, their own plans, what they think the public is still calling for.
I just wanted to emphasise that you're asking people to sign up to your idea. And I just wanted to emphasise it's really important to write an individual letter to your own MP and to the candidates, and not use a standardised one. And I have had a little bit of experience with that. And if people get a standardised letter, many times they won't take much note of it. notice of it, but they will take a lot more notice if you write an individual letter to a candidate or to your present MP or councillor or whoever it may be. So do that as well as signing up.
Definitely, yeah. Creative, bespoke, I agree. Yeah, we've had that feedback as well. But I think what's interesting about this tactic, which is slightly different, which I know you're saying as well, is you're addressing all of them in quite a public way. So it becomes quite apparent. There's a few constituencies now where I can see a few of the candidates are sweating because they've seen everyone else has kind of come out to support. That's helping switch some of those people on as well. But yeah, I agree on the letter writing, get creative, get bespoke, and talk to your candidates, obviously, so they're in the room too.
So how many people in Bristol West have you got signed up? Because this feels like a challenge.
Oh, well, that's good, yeah. Well, we've got quite an interesting action that's about to go live in a few weeks on World Environment Day in Bristol, but the exact number of people I'd have to check.
Can you?
Yeah, of course, yeah, definitely.
Because we heard the other day we've got the second biggest clinical mass cycle outside of London.
Right.
Brighton. So third biggest, sorry.
Yeah.
So I think we're all up for the challenge, probably.
Yes, yeah, good.
We've already got Zoe here.
That's a chance.
That's proof it works.
Yeah, definitely. No, that sounds a good challenge. Yeah. So do go onto the website.
I waited until the questions were over because mine isn't a question, and I think it's a good time to, in way of sort of like sharing why I signed it, in way of kind of like, facing up to the challenge and so beating the Bristol West. Why not? Yes, we have a really good climate change act. The litigation which are happening now is because we have an act of parliament. It's a legally binding requirement for government to act. And when the government fails, and it is possible, actually these days, there are so many sort of like environmental lawyers and legal groups who are taking action, kind of class action on behalf of the people, or they're taking the government to the court and try and make sure the government deliver what it is required to deliver according to the law. But there are, as you said, there are certain things which have happened which have not still, had time to be filtered into the Climate Act, like the just transition, which is really important. But we are seeing in what we saw is that, Gilets jaunes in France, and the things in the Germany that we see is that when we try to push certain things without seriously thinking about the consequences of the people, especially the most of the people who are already having a hard time, and that actually goes against our intention that can get hijacked by the extremists on all sides. And so therefore, making sure that no one is going to be left behind is really important. Unfortunately, most of the political parties, I think almost all political parties are very reluctant to talk about it. They always try to talk about it as a win-win. Yes, at the net level, there are going to be a huge amount of new, interesting, innovative, and really well-paid jobs going to be created. But it doesn't mean everybody is going to lose a job, is going to get one of those things. We have to be open about it. We have to think and plan ahead, and so make sure that no one is going to be disadvantaged. And the other reason why I'm keen on this is that when we came out of the EU, something really tragic happened relating to the powers to take the government to hold into account on the environmental side of it. Because in the European legislation, there were two fundamental laws on which EU is founded. It's almost like its constitution. And change of European presidency or anything is not going to touch those legislation. So it's really important key legislation on which we had things like environmental principle in law, things like the polluter pays principle, things like the sustainability principle, things like the precautionary principles. All those environmental principles were in legal in law. When we came out, and we had the Environmental Act, it didn't have those wordings and targets and those legally binding elements in law. What it did was the Environmental Act is telling us the government is going to produce statements which will explain what the policies are, what the principles are, what the targets are. So that means they don't have the same legal weight. And that makes it very difficult for people to take the government to to hold them into account in a court of law, the way they are doing with the Climate Change Act. So there are so many sort of little gaps in those sort of legislation, especially on the environmental side. And as you said at the beginning, we were still looking at those things as two separate things. So there are some really good things we can do. And we can't count on any future government, whatever the color of the government, to kind of deliver on this difficult agenda unless they feel that people think there are votes in it, people really care about it, and they are going to be held to account by the people or through the courts of law. So this is a kind of really good time for us to try and fill some of those gaps.
Thank you.
It's not going
Well
to be
said.
perfect,
Yeah, it's
but-
great. Yeah.
and that's really a really important step in the right direction.
Great. Thank you. Sorry. Right.
I just drafted an email to my local candidates. So can I ask the candidates that are in the space now just to meet me by the zero sign and take me a photo maybe, and then just give them a little pressure to sign up for the bill?
Great. Well, we'll pause there. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, please feel free to come and chat to me if you wish to.
Yeah, so I think, we say a round of applause for James. Brilliant. So, I think some of us will be sticking around for a little bit. If anyone wants any help getting onto the website to sign it now, if there's any questions and so on. Thank you everyone for coming. If you want to sign up to our newsletter, volunteer, there's a tap to donate, I think, around the corner as well. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.